Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. This time, we're discussing comic book best friends forever, or BFFs. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. While romantic partners are often considered to be BFFs as well as lovers, this panel will focus mainly on friends who are not romantically involved. And so we'll start with the panelists telling us a little bit about themselves and a little about what types of comics they read. Clay, will you kick it off?
Yeah, hi. I'm Clay Griffith. I'm half of the Clay and Susan Griffith writing team. We've written Vampire Empire, and we used to write comics as well. I'm a mainstream superhero guy primarily. I grew up probably 70-30 Marvel versus DC, and those are, I was a Spider-Man FF mainstream dude. I mean, that's just who I am.
Okay. Robyn?
Hi, I'm Robyn. I read mainly indie comics. I love queer comics, comics that share perspectives of marginalized voices. One of my favorite things to do at conventions is just perusing like Indie Alley. When I saw that Heroes was a sponsor of that, of this panel, I was kind of excited. They're one of my favorite conventions because they do generally have a very robust Indie Alley, which is where I just love getting a chance to meet creators who are just kind of like on the ground sharing their talents and sharing new stories with us. So that's generally where a lot of my reading takes me.
Okay. Marisa?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Marisa Wolf. I grew up reading comic books because my dad is a comic book reader. So he was mainly a Superman guy, a lot of DC. And so, for my strikeout rebellion, I did Marvel. And so read mostly X-Men. Then fell madly in love with Sandman when I was 13. So it was a gateway drug for a while. So yeah, that's me.
Okay. Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. I've been reading comic books since I was 6, which was a long time ago. I read a variety, but my heart is probably with Silver and Bronze Age, Marvel and DC. I'm currently rereading the Silver Age month by month and blogging about it at the Atomic Junk Shop blog.
Okay. Wayland?
I've been reading comics my entire life and pretty steadily since the mid-'80s, I'll say. I used to be co-owner of a comic shop. A lot of my fiction sales have been superhero fiction. I have a novel series about superhuman mercenaries, and I review superhero TV shows and movies on a site called comicbookclog.com. I'm very much a hero geek.
Those of you who've been here before know that I write historical fantasy, several kinds of romance, and science fiction. I've been reading comic books since I was about 8. And mostly I read DC rather than Marvel. So it's those are the ones that I know the best and will be talking the most about. So let's start off with looking at a distinction. Do you see a difference between BFFs and found family, and why or why not? Robyn, will you start?
Oh, you're on mute, Robyn.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you for asking that. I feel that BFFs can become found family. It's something that we talk about a lot, my friends and I, especially those of us in the queer community, because there are so many of us who end up being rejected by our birth families when we come out. Thankfully, my younger sister is really supportive. I didn't have that experience, but I can understand that fear of coming out and how the connection and sharing that with people who are friends just becomes so incredibly strong. And in some ways, having a best friend as opposed to someone who has a familial tie to you allows them to become even closer, because there are certain parts of yourself that you can share with them. And that's one of the things that draws me so strongly to comic representations of that, because it is a way to share and understand how other people live those experiences as well. And also to hopefully get those experiences out there to people who aren't fortunate enough to have found their BFFs. Yet they can share that kind of through the joy of comics.
Marisa, what do you think about found family and BFFs?
So found family is one of my favorite things in the whole world. And I think I love when they intersect. So when you can have both found family and your BFF in there. So like Teen Titans, I feel like in many iterations, the Teen Titans are completely a found family. And in that, I think Starfire and Raven are BFFs and Cyborg and Beast Boy are BFFs. Like where I think Raven and Cyborg get along great. I love their side adventures, but I don't think they're BFFs, but they're family. So I really do like, because it makes it feel more real, those interactions between the found family, because you've got some people who are like, this is my BFF. This is my big brother. And he's often a jerk and I have to kick him in the shin sometimes, but you know, I still love him very much. And I love those variations in the relationships.
Okay. Fraser?
I think my two best friends and I both consider ourselves to be siblings, practically speaking, but I think of found family as usually more of a group thing. Superman and Batman are BFFs. The X-Men are a found family. The Silver Age Doom Patrol was a found family, even though they existed before I think the term did. And I don't think of another. Green Lantern and Flash are best friends, but Silver Age versions anyway, but Legion of Superheroes comes closer to being a found family. So for me, you need more than just one person before I'd describe it as a found family trope.
Okay. Wayland?
Definitely, I'd say there's a huge difference. Like the Titans, as Marisa said, are a family. The X-Men are a family. But within that, you definitely have like little BFFs, and then in other places also. So there's a big difference, and both can be great stories, but I think there's definitely a difference. And I think when they're well written, the BFFs are great things to read.
Okay. Clay?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think the difference is both the group and also the degree of supportiveness. Your best friend is always there to support you and help you, but a found family isn't necessarily always on the same page. I mean, the X-Men were a found family, but certainly, at least in the old days anyway, Cyclops and Wolverine were not friends. But they were part of the same family, and they had the same ultimate goals, and they supported one another on the levels they could. Whereas Wolverine and Nightcrawler were best friends. So it's a level of how important they are to each other. You can have a family that doesn't always get along, but has shared values. And best friends, they may not always get along, but you always understand and support one another.
Yeah. Well, I agree with something that Robyn said, which is BFFs can transition into found family as the relationship gets deeper. I kind of agree with Fraser about you need more than two people to be a found family, but I think you can also have a family feeling toward someone else, even though there's only two of you in that dynamic. But I really love the teams that I also see as found family. And so if you had to pick one, and we're going to go around more than once, so don't feel like you have to tell us everything this time. We'll go around, and then if you want to pick up on something somebody else said, let's wait till we go around, and then you're welcome to do that. What's one BFF relationship in comic books that really stands out for you? If I said, reach for the shelf and take your favorite BFF off it, what would you pick? Marisa?
Bucky and Captain America.
And why is that?
So, I mean, I think the movie really hit it home for me. But one, like in the comics, they have been besties for like 60 years. And so they have covered all the various highs and lows. I do think I think you can have a found family of two. I think two best friends who are always there for each other can absolutely also be found family. Like Fraser was saying, he and his best friends also think of themselves as siblings, right? So I get the point of like the trope is really for multiple people, but I feel like Bucky and Steve they're brothers. They are linked for life, and they're best friends, and I love them. And then the movies have really solidified that for me. So I just extra love them there.
Okay, Fraser?
I would, even though they are not my favorite characters in DC, I'd go with Batman, Superman as a team. They are mismatched. They have completely different power and ability sets. They have very different worldviews, but that's part of what makes it interesting. And I mean, this is partly because I grew up in the Silver Age, but it just works for me. And the fact, well, when Batman is being written decently as someone who's capable of relating to other people, then yeah, I love him and Superman just hanging out at times. Occasionally getting snarky, but still getting fun.
Okay. Well,
like the end. Sorry, there was the end of One World's Finest story where they've just finished off the bad guy and they're like going somewhere to get a cup of coffee. And I'm wondering, sort of like the shawarma scene in Avengers, you wonder what's the guy going to say who's serving them coffee that night.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Wayne Family Adventures recently did a thing with Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman out on the town, and Wonder Woman and Superman were really being kind of snarky toward Batman.
Nice.
Trivia contest. Wayland, what about you?
I think the one I will always go for this first is Power Man and Iron Fist. They were such a bizarre pairing. Their comic together was fantastic. And there are just all these little goofy scenes of them goofing on each other, which is exactly what friends do. And the writers have even said, yeah, we don't know where that came from. That's not what we were going for. It just sort of happened. And then, unfortunately, the very last time you see Iron Fist in the Netflix Defenders series before those all went away, the very last time he shows up as a guest star on the Luke Cage series. And that one episode, they finally got the dynamic right. And it was great to see it.
Clay?
I think I would choose Reed and Ben from Fantastic Four. Although Ben and Johnny is a much more flamboyant, sort of wacky best friend situation, I always was drawn to sort of Reed and Ben's sort of more mature, comfortable relationship. They didn't do as much with them together. But I love those little bits, particularly in the old Kirby days, where Ben's holding up some 20-ton equipment while Reed's fiddling, and Ben's going, he's yakking. But there's something calming about these sort of old college buddies grown up working together that I found it very comforting to see them together.
Okay. Robyn?
So let me make sure I'm answering the right question. Is it our personal favorite, or is it one that we think is kind of like a seminal relationship?
Oh, really? You can do either one.
Okay. So I will say I love cutesy stuff. So my favorite one that's just super cute is Squirrel Girl and Tippy Toe, just because they just give me warm fuzzies. I love them so much. But in terms of like a seminal relationship, I really kind of relate to what Fraser was saying about Bruce and Clark, because I feel that, Batman Bruce is kind of like this very jaded, pragmatic, pessimistic person, and Clark is so incredibly hopeful, and they just fit together as this yin and yang. And I feel like Bruce tones down Clark's idealism sometimes, and Clark kind of gets Bruce, back on track sometimes when he gets too deep in the muck of just his kind of grimdark. There's this one, it's not a comic, but it's obviously Bruce and Clark. It's a short story by Cory Doctorow called Model Minority. And it has that representation of the two of them and just their ability to, because kind of like you were talking about before, where like friends fight, and them pushing back against each other and them trying to figure out that balance between idealism and pragmatism, when one can go too far and you just being kind of ineffectual. So I like that their relationship balances them in that way.
Well, for me, it's hard to pick because that's a dynamic that I really like. But I have to go with Saturn Girl, Lightning Lad, and Cosmic Boy in the Legion of Superheroes, because when the Legion started, they didn't know each other. It was them. R.J. Brand said, "Here, take a lot of money and form a superhero team." And it's like, well, okay. And they came out of that experience really being close and tight knit, and they were the first three. And so, even though they have definitely evolved into found family along with the rest of the Legion, they're just one of my all-time favorite friendship relationships, because it's like, yeah, I've got this person I'm in a relationship with that has my back, but you have my back too, and we've got yours. And I just really liked that. Anybody want to add anything before we move on?
There was a great I'm not a fan of Tom King's Batman, but there was a scene where Superman, Clark and Lois and Bruce and Selina were going on a double date.
Oh, yeah.
Bruce talking to Selina about, "You've got to understand, I never had a choice about becoming Batman, but Superman, he could have ruled this world as a tyrant, and all he does is help people. I admire him so much for that." And Clark is telling Lois, "I never had a choice. The way the Kents raised me, I had to help people. Bruce, he could have dissipated his life, lived off his money. All he wants to do is help people. I admire him so much for that." And it was just a neat moment.
Yeah.
There was a great scene in one of the Justice League Unlimited episodes. It was like a throwaway scene, but it was so perfect, of Batman and Superman fighting. I think it was the Cadre. And at one point, Superman's like, "What's their deal anyway?" And Batman's like, "They want to take over the world." And there's a beat, and he goes, "Oh, Rob Banks. I forget which." The two of them working off that was just so entertaining to watch.
Well, is there any other BFF relationship that you really like?
I could go on with a ton more, but I'll let everyone else go first.
Well, I think we all could, actually, but
Nightcrawler and Wolverine, Dick Grayson and Wally West. Those two also leap to mind. Wonder Man and the Beast.
Rocket and Groot.
Yeah.
Stick Man and Moody
Booster Gold.
Yeah.
what?
Blue Beetle and Booster Gold.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Robyn, did you say something? Did you say something?
You're on mute again, Robyn.
Sorry, I live close to an airport, so there are always planes flying over. So I was trying to mute to block out that sound. I didn't. I have like a little list, but I was like, nobody's gonna know who these characters are.
It doesn't matter, because if you tell us, people might go find them, and so
That's awesome. Yeah, that's
share.
true. So I also I'm very close with my friends, but also still very close with my biological family. So I do love the dynamic when friends become family. And my older and younger sisters mean a lot to me. So when you have that relationship where they become like familial, so I really like Jeopard and Gus in Sweet Tooth. And even though it's not exactly like a best friend kind of relationship, it becomes more familial. They're not related. So they start out kind of as friends in a similar way, where like Gus is just incredibly like, sorry, excuse the pun because he's a deer boy, but bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And Jeopard's very pragmatic, but he ends up becoming like a father figure to him. He ends up becoming, his caretaker and someone who loves him, but in the same regard, Gus also becomes someone who almost kind of returns his heart to him. And there's another book that I absolutely love called Snapdragon, and it has a similar dynamic where you have like a young kid who is like exploring their magic, and they come across this grumpy witch in the woods, and she's like, "Oh, you're magic too. I guess I have to teach you now." And then they end up just bonding and having this great friendship across generations. I do really love cross-generational relationships and cross-generational friendships as well.
Well, actually, what you said led into the next thing that I was going to raise, but does anybody want to add anything on this before we move on?
I don't know if it's in the comics, but one of the highlights of Hawkeye, the show for me, was Kate Bishop and Yelena. I will watch an entire series of just their shenanigans. Like I I love the way they're building their friendship. You see enemies to lovers a lot, but like enemies to besties, let's go. Like, I love it.
Yes, I actually wrote that down in the notes as like a best friend trope, and I wrote it as I hate you, you love me.
Right? It's so perfect. Oh, so good.
If somebody else said something, anybody want to answer?
I'm not sure those two have actually met in the comics. I agree. The scenes on Hawkeye were brilliant. I loved those. They were phenomenal. But I'm not even sure they've run across each other in the comics.
Makes sense.
I'll throw out an odd one. Man-Thing and Richard Rory in the old Bronze Age Man-Thing stories. He's a mindless empath. Richard Rory is kind of a schmuck and a loser. And they meet, and for some reason, they sort of hang out in the swamp together. And it's strange, but Steve Gerber's run on Man-Thing is extremely strange and a lot of fun. And it works. I could not say why, but it does.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and look at within family, like within the Bat family or within the Legion or the Avengers or a group that is a found family. Who are the besties that you like? Give us an example. Fraser, I think it's your turn to start.
Oh, joy. Can I pass? Because now I have to think on this one.
You can pass and you can punt to Wayland.
Well, with the X-Men I mentioned earlier, Nightcrawler and Wolverine, especially back in the late 80s, I think early 90s, they were very well fleshed out as best of friends. And it was another one of those odd dynamics that shouldn't work. Nightcrawler is very inspirational and religious and upbeat, the sort of charming swashbuckler, and Wolverine is just sort of like, yeah, whatever, kid. But they really clicked really well. And there were some beautiful scenes with the two of them together.
Clay, how about you?
Well, in the even earlier X-Men, the original guys, they were never totally successful in developing it because it was a jumpy book and it had different writers at different times and they couldn't quite fix it. But they tried to get Beast and Iceman as a group and as a team up. And there are some very good issues in the later run when Steranko did a couple of issues on the art, and then when Neil Adams came in to do the art. Roy Thomas was mainly doing the writing. They tried, and there are some bits that are really strong, like when the Sentinels attacked and they were together. I wish they had survived longer in that format so they could have done more, because I like the original Beast before he turned furry. Furry one's okay, but I like the original Beast, and I like the original X-Men. There was a lot of lost potential, I think, with the original X-Men.
Okay. Robyn?
I'm gonna have to pass on this one. I can't think of any. I'm trying to rack my brain of the various found family stories that I've read, and I'm drawing a blank.
Well, if you come up with something, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Fraser, you look like you have something you want to say.
I'm going to pick an odd one. There is a not in continuity series, Superhero High, or DC Superhero Girls, which has all of DC's superheroes training at a high school where you have Amanda Waller as principal, Grodd as vice principal, Etrigan teaches poetry, and because it's out of continuity and generally kind of goofy, they come up with all sorts of weird pairings and buddy mixes like Katana and Beast Boy. They train together because he can fly, he can climb a wall, he can hang from the ceiling, and that forces her to be constantly improvising and trying to be on her guard. And that's such an odd combo, it really works for me. And they had several more like that.
Marisa?
Well, I do love Starfire and Raven for that same like grumpy sunshine thing we've been talking about. One, like Clay was making me think of kind of missed potential. So Kitty's best friend, Kitty Pryde, was Ileana Colossus's little sister, and they were best friends. And then, her soul got eaten by a demon and she went to another dimension, and very X-Men, lose your best friend. But in Excalibur for a while, there was like a little girl gang going on. So like Rachel Summers and Kitty and Wolfsbane were like kind of besties. And it was very cool when they remembered to play it, of Kitty being like really hesitant because she had lost her best friend, and it's not like her life was any more safe now. But like being friends with Rachel Summers was pretty safe because nobody's gonna kill the Phoenix. She's already escaped like 2 realities. She's gonna be fine. But they always, it was only really small moments, and then when Wolfsbane got there, like they did a little bit more. But I wish they had really, because how baller would that be? Like Kitty Pryde, Wolfsbane, and Rachel Summers just like hanging out, being like best friend teenage X-Men. So.
Well, for me, this has kind of been dropped. It sort of disappeared after Wolfman and Perez left the Teen Titans. And I love the Dick and Wally stories that they've done. But I think Dick and Donna qualify as besties too. Nightwing and Wonder Girl.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, he's the one she went to when she thought it was time to face the past. And yeah, he's the best detective in the group probably, but that's bearing your soul and all your worries. And you don't do that with somebody you don't really trust. And then she asked him to give her away when she got married. And so I've always liked that relationship. And they had a really lovely conversation in the World's Finest Titans issue about Wonder Girl I think it was last month. And so I really like that dynamic a lot. But if we're going to talk about cross-generational relationships, I like Barbara Gordon and Cassandra Cain, because Babs taught Cass and helped her learn to talk. And I think they really trust each other, even if they don't hang out and eat popcorn and watch movies all the time. Let's see, Clay, I think we're back around to you. Is there a cross-generational friendship that you like?
Oh, man. I don't know. Pass. Go to someone else. I have to think about that. I hadn't thought about cross-generational stuff.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Robyn, what about you?
Oh yeah, I gave mine already, unfortunately. I really like the relationship between Gus and Jep in Sweet Tooth, and then also that one in Snapdragon. Just the mentorship that blooms into friendship, that blooms into, you know, stronger familial type ties. Those were both always the elements of, you know, learning, and then kind of the workout montage in there when you're training, and the old grump kind of softening to this young person. But yeah, I think Snapdragon wins out just a smidge over Sweet Tooth because it's a little cuter, and Sweet Tooth can be kind of grimdark, especially with Jeff Lemire's art style. It's gorgeous and it fits the story very well. But surprisingly, as dark as the show is, they made it lighter than the book.
Are we doing specifically cross-generational?
Yeah, but you don't have to. You can talk. Sorry, can't talk. You can tell us about anything that you feel inclined.
Okay, well, I will pick this one. 1980s, J.M. DeMatteis did a Dr. Fate series. The premise is Kent Nelson has moved on. Naboo is trapped on Earth in his physical old body. And Fate was originally supposed to be 2 people, Kent and his girlfriend Inza. Naboo didn't let that happen because it gave him more control, and he was a control freak. Now it's passed on to a new couple, and Naboo serves as their very crotchety mentor, father figure, and as it turns out, has a good but hidden agenda. And it was just such a remarkably neat, funny, strange figure that played to DeMatteis' taste. There was one, they have a little demon sidekick as well. And he has speaking of found family, where he goes back to his demon world and he realizes it's not home anymore. And he comes back to them and it's, you are my family now. And I highly recommend, I think it's all been collected. I highly recommend it.
Okay. Marisa,
I'm just thinking of it.
Nice.
Marisa, do you want to expound further, or do you want to add a different pair, or what?
No, I'll add a different pair. So I think in the comics, almost any time you put Peter Parker with anybody older, I love it. I love Steve Rogers and Peter Parker. in the movies, I love Tony Stark and Peter Parker. I think that's a really good one where neither of them lose their flaws in that relationship either. And so there's tension built from character, which I love, because it's clear the care is there. And that like hug when Peter comes back after the snap before, oh my, I can feel it in my heart just thinking about it. It's so perfect. I love that relationship.
Okay. Wayland, what about you?
Cross-generational is something I hadn't considered until you started mentioning it a few minutes ago. Actually, I think I'm going to go with Superman Nightwing.
Okay.
The people who write them together do a phenomenal job of it when it's someone who knows the history of both characters. That's where Nightwing got his name from originally. It was from an old Kryptonian legend Superman had told him. And there's one of those sort of retcon stories in the time after Dick had given up being Robin before he became Nightwing, when he was traveling around trying to figure out what he wanted to do. And there was just a great scene of him kind of hanging out with Clark, going, "What do I do now?" It was a really well done story.
Yeah. Clay, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, this might count. Swamp Thing is sort of an older guy. He's sort of a great elder. John Constantine is sort of a young punk. And this is the original, Alan Moore run. The weird thing about that relationship was it was actually the young punk who was teaching Swamp Thing who he was, who was teaching him about himself. So you had this smug kind of jerk of a magician teaching this sort of calm, wonderful elder creature, this is who you are, and you need to listen to me, and I'll tell you everything you need to know. And it was brilliantly done, as almost everything Alan Moore did was brilliantly done. But that's sort of cross-generational in an odd way.
Okay. Yeah, Robyn.
So just piggybacking off of Marisa's, of course, Old Man Peter and Miles in Across the Spider-Verse is just absolutely adorable. I love those scenes with them. Especially because he kind of like inspires Peter to have the courage to become a dad, which is something that he wants to do. But also, and I came across it more because I read Miss Marvel comics than because I read Spider-Man comics. But there was this crossover. It was super fun with Peter and Kamala. And the first issue was super fun because you read it in one direction and it's from Kamala's perspective. And then you flip it over and it's from Peter's perspective. So it was super fun. And he was a little bit older, not like Old Man Peter, but maybe like fresh out of college, a little bit into his career, and something had gone on with him where he had been kind of blacklisted and demoted in the scientific community. But Kamala hadn't really had older mentors in that area who could kind of help her understand, just some of the basic nuances of like being a hero. So that was kind of fun to, even though she had come into her powers and kind of taught herself her powers a little bit, just having someone else there that she could just kind of talk to and relate to. And then slight spoiler, they end up swapping bodies. So then you have like this old dude and this teenager in each other's bodies. And it was just like so fun.
I stopped to make a note and I couldn't remember what I was going to ask you about that. Does anybody have a pair of BFFs that really surprised them, that they turned out to be BFFs? And I think, Robyn, I think we're back to you to start.
Shoot. Not to beat a dead horse, but even though it kind of works and it makes sense, like Bruce and Clark kind of surprised me a little bit because he is like so untrusting. And then, I mean, even some of the things he still does, I'm like, man, that was kind of crappy. You should have did Clark like that. But, Clark will forgive him. But yeah, that relationship is kind of surprising to me that those kind of like few instances where he like says something to Clark and I'm just kind of like, surprised you actually have a heart in there, you Grinch, kind of moments. And I'm trying to think of specific instances. where, you know, Bruce just does things that you wouldn't expect him to do because of that relationship. You just expect him to be so jaded that he wouldn't, not that he wouldn't trust Clark, because there have been times where he said specifically, like, almost kind of like he's made like this profile of Clark because that's the kind of person he is. He's going to make a profile on everybody. And he knows that Clark is just a trustworthy guy. But just the fact that he would let his guard down enough to actually trust him is kind of one that in some regards like doesn't make sense at times.
Okay. Marisa?
In a really fun way in the CW shows, which mixed bag, but Flash and Green Arrow, and then Flash and Supergirl, the way they set up both of those friendships was a delight. I still giggle when Barry shoots Oliver with arrows, like when they've swapped body. Oh my god, so funny. But a surprise, right? Because you don't always see. I didn't always see that coming. And the dorky joy of Supergirl and Flash are just so adorable. I think also in the movies, I was surprised at how deep they allowed the relationship with Clint and Natasha to be without making it romantic. And that was amazing to me and so joy-giving, because it was like to the bone. They will die for each other before they made that actually literal. But like Natasha will drop anything when Clint's in trouble. Clint trusted Natasha with his family. I loved how they set it up, and they never even tried to make it like sexy times, which amazing.
Fraser?
I will pick a weird one. One of the things, because it shouldn't have worked, one of the things I hate about the 21st century Joker is that he doesn't want to steal. He doesn't really want to kill. He just wants to hurt Batman and do things to Batman. And Batman is his everything. And in the Batman Lego movie, they parody that, and it's beautiful. There's one point where the Joker is admit that I'm important. Admit that you hate me. You've never said it once, not in 79 years. And Batman just looks at him, Joker, I don't believe in shipping. You're nothing to me. And that is what leads the joke to let the Eye of Sauron out of the Phantom Zone. It's a very strange movie in some ways. And then at the end, Batman, possibly lying, tells the Joker, you're right. You are the reason I get up and perform 500 push-ups before breakfast. You are the reason I train. You're the reason I carry this belt. I hate you. And the Joker is finally happy and helps save the world. Shouldn't have worked, but it did.
Wayland, do you have one?
90s Justice League. They started off hating each other, but Wally West and Kyle Rayner eventually really, really clicked well as friends. And it was entertaining watching that happen and then just watching them sort of hang out at times.
Clay?
Back to the CW TV. On The Flash, I always sort of preferred, oddly enough, Barry and Iris to be friends. The way they sort of were at the beginning, you know, Barry was carrying a torch, but they played them as friends early on. And we wrote, my wife and I wrote Flash and Arrow tie-in novels.
And they were both very good.
Thank you. We did it back in the early seasons when Barry and Iris weren't particularly romantic, so they just hung out and capered together. And when they became much more romantic, there were some good scenes there, but it always bugged me a little bit because they were kind of brother and sister. Mm-hmm. And I felt like when they romanticized Barry and Iris, in order to keep your attention away from the fact that they were raised together as brother and sister, they had to pull Joe out more than I liked, because I loved Joe and I loved Barry and the relationship with Joe. And I felt like Joe got screwed because you can't have a father relationship with the father. You know, it's just a little creepy. So they had to do some adjustments, which I didn't like as much, but I loved early Barry and Iris. I wish they had kept them as platonic friends.
It's kind of like if Earth 2, Dick Grayson and Helena Wayne had gotten together after growing up together at Wayne Manor.
Yeah, just a little weird.
Yeah, the pair, I'm going to go back into the dark ages of comic book history, i.e. the 1970s. And the pair that I really thought, I didn't see how they were going to turn out to be buddies. And it turned out to be one of the best series I've ever read, for me personally anyway, and that's Green Lantern, Green Arrow, the 10-issue miniseries where they go on the road together, and Hal is Mr. Establishment, and Green Arrow is, Ollie is Mr. Anti-Establishment, and they clash all the time, but they work together when it's important, and you can see this bond forming between the characters, and I really just love those. But something that Clay said reminded me of something else I wanted to pick up, which is that sometimes the relation, and we've really kind of all touched on it, sometimes a relationship exists in the comic and not in other media, and vice versa. And so pick a BFF relationship from the comics or other media and say which way you prefer that dynamic, like Clay just did with Barry and Iris, and why. And Marisa, I think we're over to you.
I'm sorry, can you ask that one more time? My computer just started spazzing on the other side.
That's okay. Some characters are BFFs in one medium and not another. You know, sometimes the comics versus the movies, games versus the comics, whatever. Pick one and say which way you prefer it and why.
I prefer, well, I'm going to go back to a well I've already driven, but I love it. Like, I want more Kate Bishop and Yelena forever. And like Wayland said, I don't think they have interacted at all in the comics. So I love that a lot.
Okay. Fraser?
Well, I was thinking of a pairing. The Shade and Jack Knight were a great pair of buddies in James Robinson's Starman, but since Jack Knight hasn't showed up in any other medium, Shade, he bonds with Stargirl and Stargirl, but I kind of miss that. That was a wonderful book, and they made a good couple, buddies.
Okay, Wayland?
Well, actually, I'll go back to one that I think Marisa reminded me of earlier when she was talking about some of the teen X-Men hanging out. One of the groups that's been largely forgotten about, except for one truly horrible movie, Cannonball and Sunspot and the New Mutants. That was another come from completely different backgrounds. Sunspot was this incredibly wealthy Brazilian kid, and Sam was working in a coal mine in Kentucky. And then they ended up on founding members of the New Mutants, and they became like best of friends. And that still pops up fairly often. And I think it's been done really well. And there was that really horrible New Mutants movie they did a while back where pretty much all the characters were, I am this character in name only. And I thought that was a real missed opportunity. I wish they'd done a lot of things with that movie, but I wish they'd done something with that.
Clay?
Scarlet Witch and the Vision. I actually never bought them. I never purchased them, and I never really bought them in comics. It just never hit me. The relationship that they tried to build just never hit me. And it didn't hit me at first in the movies either. I felt like they were forcing it, and until the TV show. And I thought WandaVision was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. It was touching and it was powerful, and it was still superheroes and they wore capes, but it was wonderful. So I never got that from that couple in the comics ever, to me.
Robyn?
So this is actually kind of the other way, they kind of romanticize these two characters in the comic, and then, it's kind of a spoiler if people haven't read Y the Last Man. But there were two characters that they kind of made romantic that didn't make sense at all. And in the show, they kind of hinted towards it at first, but it felt like they were going to push them more into a friend zone, which I felt like made so much more sense for their characters, because in the comic it really kind of felt kind of shoehorned in there. The show got canceled, so I don't know if they were eventually going to bring it back around and make them that, but I just felt that their relationship as BFFs was so much stronger, and it made a lot more sense than to try to make them romantic. So I was really kind of hopeful when they made it seem like that was going to be the path they were going to go with the show.
Well, for me, it's the CW made Clark and Lana BFFs, which made total sense because they grew up together in this little town. They went all the way through school together. And in the comic book, I think there's too much baggage of the regrettable era of the 1960s and 70s when Lana and Lois were always vying for Superman's affections and in a race to figure out Superman's secret identity, because then you'd have to marry the one who figured it out. And it's like, oh, Lord save us. So I thought the opportunity to have Lana as Clark's best friend and the way they used it in the show really worked out well. We're coming up on time.
I just realized, Vision and Scarlet Witch aren't BFFs. They're a romantic couple. So what the hell am I talking about? Never mind.
I mean, you're good. I think it was still a good point, though. I mean, because same, they were not very convincing in the comics.
I will disagree with that, but each to his own.
Yeah, fair.
Well, whatever the relationship is, friends, lovers, whatever, it has to work. It has to be set up so it works. Yeah. We are coming up on time, so let's really quickly. Is there a BFF relationship that you like that's been retconned away? Fraser, will you start?
I would have to think on that. Sorry.
We'll come back to you. Wayland, what about you?
Not even necessarily so much retconned, but something I was thinking about when I was getting ready for this panel that actually made me a little sad. Just about every single one of these great friendships we've all been talking about, you don't see anymore. Yeah. They've lost that degree of emotional depth in most of the storytelling in the comics. And aside from that, I cannot remember who it was for the life of me at the moment. There was one really entertaining pairing they kept doing back when they were doing annual Justice League, Justice Society team-ups. And at the moment, I can't remember who that was. And they've erased and restored the Justice Society so many times that pretty much all of those relationships are toast.
Yeah. Clay, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. A lot of from the male point of view, the bromance, which were in comics all the time, Cap and Nick Fury and all of them. I mean, it was great. And Reed and Ben. It's as if they don't want to take time to explore those, or if they can't have a full-on romantic relationship, they don't want to mess with it, or they want to have too much conflict. They're afraid for characters to get along because they have to fight. I don't know what the problem is, but I agree with that. It seems to be gone or going.
Okay. Robyn?
No, come back to us.
Sorry, these planes are flying over. So this particular question, unfortunately, doesn't apply to a lot of the comics I read, because I read so many indie comics. Retconning doesn't really happen as much because it's generally that same creator team. The one that I do read most often is our Batman comics. And they've kind of kept those friendships going that are standard there. Yeah, so it doesn't really apply, unfortunately, as much to indie comics.
Okay, Marisa?
I feel like that's actually a big win for indie comics, honestly.
As part of the draw for them, is it?
Right.
You get a single story.
Yeah, the story is the story. Yeah. I miss Wolverine and Colossus. I thought they were a super fun pair, and the fastball special was a delight. So I do miss that. I feel like they can touch on it a little bit with Colossus and Deadpool in the movie. It's not the same, obviously, at all. But they tried to make some of the same jokes. But those are some of the characters I can remember drinking a beer together and having fun in the comics. And I also, from the 1997 X-Men cartoon, I loved that Storm and Rogue and Jean Grey were friends. It was the 90s, so they went to the mall and shopped and whatever together, but they were friends and they liked each other. And I did not, they changed generations on people, they minimized roles, all kinds of things happened in the movies, but I really love when we have strong friendships, whether it's the bromance or the the chicks getting stuff done, like whatever it is. Like I just miss those deep friendships, or the hints of deep friendships that you get sometimes.
Storm and Jean's a good example. They were great friends in the early Claremont, Byrne, Cockrum, X-Men, terrific pairing. And the movies just kind of lost that.
Yeah.
Well, Fraser, we're back around to you.
Okay, back in the 70s, Len Wein took Green Arrow and Hawkman when he was writing Justice League, and he made them the kind of buddies who will always argue and never say one civil word to each other, but deep under it all, they like each other. And Jerry Conway later kept that going. And, you know, Green Arrow is the anti-establishment figure, Hawkman is a space cop. But then when Jeff Johns was writing, I guess, Hawkman and Justice Society a few years ago, he brings back the same connection, except they really hate each other. They are not friends because, I don't know, we just want to make people really hostile to each other these days, it seems, sometimes. And that is a shame because it was a fun pairing.
Yeah, sometimes we should do a panel about how to create conflict in the comic books. Robyn, did you want to add something else?
Yes, when Marisa was talking, it made me think of one that went the other way. So for Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, in the show, they created a character that doesn't exist in the comic. They created her best friend, Casey, and she just adds so much to the story. I feel like she makes Lunella's character much more relatable, but she has her own stories as well. And I think the pairing of them and just them getting into hijinks together it just brings a lot of joy to the series. That, I mean, even though the comic is like a fun comic, I personally feel that the show is just so much more lighter, and it benefits a lot, I think, from having a best friend other than a dinosaur for this young girl.
Well,
Now that you said that, you're reminding me of the Static cartoon when that was running, Virgil and Richie.
Yes.
That was a really, really well done relationship on the show that is not anywhere near that strong in the comics that I've read.
the relationship I miss is Silver Age Clark Kent and Pete Ross, because at one point Pete was the only person other than Jonathan and Martha who knew Clark's secret identity. And when they were fighting Mordru in Smallville late in the adventure run around 380 or something like that, they've won the battle. Everything's over. They're erasing people's memories so that they don't go back to the future and change things. And Mon-El takes the device and turns it on Pete, because Pete can't know that he's destined to save Superboy's life. I'm screwing that up somehow.
He turned it on Superboy so Superboy would forget Pete.
Yes. Thank you, Fraser. Because I was talking, I was going, that is not right. You are totally messing that up. So thank you for saving that. And the relationship I missed that hasn't been retconned, it just got undone, is the aging up of John Kent destroyed the Super Sons and his friendship with Damian. And I really love that book. But anyway, we're actually at time. So let's go around, tell people where they can find information about you and your work. If you have a recent, upcoming, or new release that you want to highlight, this would be the time. Clay?
You can find us at clayandsusangriffith.com. We're also on Facebook and something else called Blue Sky, maybe. Obviously not there often. And I pray to God we'll have something new coming out next year.
Okay, Robyn?
Our website is for my podcast is diversityissues.libsyn.com.
Marisa?
Yeah, marisawolf.net or marisawolf.com, spelled just like it is on the screen. So if it's still Halloween time when you see this, 13 Stories of Horror is an anthology out right now. And if it's closer to February, then in February, my debut solo novel from Baen comes out called Beyond Enemies, and I would love for you to check it out.
Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. That's Fraser. My short story of 20th century historical fantasies, 19 Infinity, came out this summer from Behold the Book. And you can find me online at frasersherman.com, Facebook, Blue Sky, X, where I insult right-wingers. That's the main reason I'm there. And I blog about comics at Atomic Junk Shop.
Wayland?
I am some version of Wayland Smith on whatever social media I happen to be on. As I said, I review the superhero TV shows and movies and some of the comic stories on comicbookclog.com. I have a series of books about Wildside Incorporated, who are superhuman mercenaries. The third one of those, I'm probably in third set of revisions on and hope to get out soon. And yeah, I've got a lot of other stuff out, except there is a short story out there called The Machine Stops that was apparently written before I was born by a guy named Wayland Smith.
Okay.
It's not me. Goodreads insists on it. They've got it on my page, but it's not me.
Or is it?
Or is it time travel, Wayland?
Well, if that happens to come around, I need to leave myself a note about which stocks to buy.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
You can find me at nancynorthcott.com, at Nancy Northcott on X or whatever it is this week. And on Blue Sky, I'm Nancy North. And my most recent release is The King's Champion. It's World War II conclusion to the Boar King's Honor trilogy. And that's from Falstaff Books. So thank you, everybody, for being on the panel. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And thanks to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. You can find more information about them at www.heroesonline.com.